I'm here with Jabez from Structure Research. We're just going to have a little bit of a chat about some of the findings that he shared with us yesterday in his presentation, and run through some insights around kind of cloud development, how that's impacting the data center industry, and how it relates to APAC as well. So I've got a bunch of questions lined up, but we want to make this a bit of an interactive one. So if at any point anyone has anything that they want to add or that they want to ask Jabez, please put your hand up. I can't see you because this light is very, very bright, but one of my colleagues will run over a microphone. And yeah, you can ask your question as well. So yeah, let's get into it. Jabez, one of the things that I think was really interesting yesterday that you shared with us was around kind of, growth of the cloud in general, and we looked at the US market in particular. But I wanted to see if you could just start things off by talking a little bit about how you see that kind of, I guess, like translating over to the Asia Pacific market.
Yeah, I think, because of how AI has dominated the headlines over the last 12 months, people often forget that the bulk of the growth that we're seeing in Asia today, at least from an infrastructure procurement side, so what the hyperscalers are actually deploying in the region, is still primarily catering for cloud growth. Cloud growth is still very much a massive driver of data center adoption, data center leasing across all of the major markets that we track. Granted, they're starting to implement AI capacity adjacent to their cloud infrastructure deployments, but that I think is still at a very nascent stage. And obviously, because of all the investments taking place in the region, it's going to accelerate moving forward. I think that's what people are really excited about, is how is the interplay between cloud infrastructure and AI, how that's going to evolve across some of these markets in Asia.
Yeah, let's definitely come on to that in a second, but just maybe backtracking slightly before we do. You mentioned yesterday, and I think there was a really interesting graph where you showed like kind of growth rates and the absolute revenues from cloud providers through, I guess, the early days of the pandemic to the current day. I just wondered if you could take a few minutes to just kind of explain the journey that the cloud companies went on during that period, from kind of the initial tailwinds from work from home into that kind of cost rationalization stage, and then the growth that we've seen over the past kind of year or so. It'd be great to just get a little bit more insight into that kind of evolution, I suppose.
Yeah, happy to touch on some of these points. I think in the beginning, during the COVID period, I think you saw a lot of big investments into digital infrastructure. People were not certain of what the world would look like during that uncertain time, and so you saw a lot of technology companies, enterprises make some really big bets, probably you could say uncharacteristic bets on digital infrastructure, because they just didn't know how long this was going to last. Is this fully digital, fully virtual way of doing life and doing business going to stay for 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, or even more than that? And so they were making some really big purchases of cloud infrastructure capacity, compute instances, storage instances, developing machine learning capabilities, shifting from analog to digital. And I think that reached a level of exuberance, and then once we had more clarity that there was going to be some resolution to the pandemic, people were going to get back to some level of normalcy from before, you saw this wave of cost optimizations, because people basically overbought lots of cloud infrastructure capacity because they weren't sure what they would need. And there was some level of hoarding, there was some level of creating some sort of safety buffer that they would never go dark in terms of that. And that's, I think, you couple that with the macroeconomic environment that changed, with interest rates rising, capital being harder to access, more expensive capital, and that led to that big correction, big pullback in digital infrastructure growth rates, and that's why you saw that sort of deceleration take place post-COVID between, call it, end of 2021 into end of 2022.
Makes sense. And then we're back on the up now, which is good. But how long do you see that kind of lasting for? We've seen the kind of results from the AWSs, the Googles, the Microsofts this year, posting kind of like 20% growth rate in their cloud businesses quarter after quarter. Is that something that you foresee kind of happening for a long time going forward now, or what's the outlook there?
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, we get a lot of questions from investors when we talk to investors, developers, operators, hyperscalers even, and there's a lot of worries about, are we in a bubble? Is this all going to pop at some point because of all the you can call it over exuberance in investing in digital infrastructure in certain markets that get overheated. But I think, and I wouldn't rule out that we're in a bubble. I mean, it's really hard to say today, but it's clear that the hyperscalers are definitely investing heavily, and they've also been very transparent with the fact that they are over-investing. They are purposely and knowingly, intentionally over-investing in digital infrastructure investments, in servers, in data center capacity, in land acquisitions, because they just don't know what they need for AI over the long term. They know that they need to be, that AI is here to stay, and they're going to develop a lot of AI capabilities, but they're just not sure what they'll need in the long term, and so they don't want to fall behind, and they see this as a defining moment, a pivotal moment in this digital infrastructure wave that could decide who the winners are going to be for the next 10, 20 plus years. So
yeah, I think the comments from the kind of leaders of those businesses all seem to be along the lines of the opportunity cost of not investing is far greater than kind of building a little bit more than we're going to need, right? And yeah, losing out on getting ahead of the game. Do you think that kind of buzz has come a little bit too early for the industry in terms of AI? Like, it's kind of difficult right now, despite this fact that this spending has ramped up like significantly. We're not really seeing too much of a return on it yet. When's that going to happen, and what do we need to see for the kind of investment in AI to start bringing in returns?
Yeah, I mean, your guess is probably as good as mine. That's the $500 billion question. Like, when will you actually make money from AI? I don't think it's as clear. So people see it as, okay, there's traditional applications and then there's AI applications. And granted, there will be AI native applications that will just that will be unique to what we've previously experienced in the past. But if you see what's happening with AI today, a lot of AI is infused into existing applications, right? Like if you look at WhatsApp, look at how Meta's deploying their Meta AI, it's all into existing applications today, albeit they're also developing dedicated specialized hardware with glasses and incorporating AI into AR and VR type scenarios. But I think the reason why I think there's a lot of the industry is fairly okay with the commercial side not materializing that quickly is because it's hard to measure that because you're infusing it into existing applications. And so it's more of, if you don't incorporate AI into your Evernote application or your email application or your work collaboration systems, someone else is going to do it, and they're going to migrate out of your quote-unquote legacy application for someone that has an AI-infused application. So it's really also playing defense a lot of the times, and you want to make sure that you don't get left behind as most people innovate to incorporate AI capabilities into their workloads.
Yeah, so is it more likely that it's going to be kind of more of a behind-the-scenes thing than everyone's waiting to wake up one day and they've got their robot AI butler, but that's probably not what's going to happen, right? It's going to be life as usual, but with AI kind of supporting behind the scenes, and that's probably a little bit more difficult to kind of predict and even see really when that's happening. So we have to dive into the kind of, I guess, the bigger details there. That's not really a question, but
yeah, I agree.
Okay, cool. Well, we've had a lot of kind of parallels drawn, I think, in your presentation yesterday between the US, or you mentioned there were some parallels in terms of where capacity is being deployed in the US and where it's being deployed across APAC in terms of there's some kind of top-heavy markets like Northern Virginia, which is seeing a lot of hyperscale development. Plus, there's some markets that you might kind of not have expected to see up there in like the top 5, top 7, top 8, such as Iowa or Columbus, Ohio. If we kind of take that data and we translate it over to APAC, what is the kind of Northern Virginia of APAC in terms of capacity, and what is like kind of an Iowa or a Columbus?
Yeah, I think one thing that we've learned internally as an analyst team tracking both the US market and spending so much time in Asia is that, at least for now, there isn't a sort of mapping that you can do for what's happening in the US today and then applying to Asia, because to be frank, a lot of the training workloads are being situated in the US, and those are I think a lot of times residing in self-built data centers by the hyperscalers. They're in remote locations like in Des Moines, Iowa, Omaha, Nebraska. So middle of nowhere where you get really cheap power, lots of land, lots of scale. And on top of that, there's all these government municipalities that are giving you incentives just to build data centers in the middle of nowhere. And so that being close to home for them and AI training and LLM development being seen as very proprietary IP, they're situating that in the US today, and I don't see them doing that at the same level in the APAC region today, or maybe at least in the near term. But what I do see is that, and speaking with a lot of industry participants in Asia, is that they're seeing the main driver of that being inference. So once the applications get trained, a lot of the inference workloads and the architecture, the infrastructure that is associated with delivering AI inference will make its way to the APAC region.
That makes sense. With that in mind, do you think there's a risk of kind of, we've been hearing all day and all of yesterday about the vast number of projects that are ongoing within Asia, and I think AI plays a big role in a lot of them. Is there a risk that we kind of like oversupply the market here if a lot of the kind of training facilities are being built in the US?
Yeah, I think the number one question that we get from a lot of investors and developers is the oversupply question, like, is this market oversupplied? I think literally yesterday in a meeting, I had a question, is Johor oversupplied? I've had people ask, is Tokyo oversupplied? Is Korea oversupplied? And I think the term oversupplied to me is a very vague way, and whenever someone asks me if a market is oversupplied, I kind of ask them, what do you mean? What is your definition of oversupply, right? Because does oversupply mean that you're basing it on historical growth? So because the market only grew by X number of megawatts over the last 5 years, and now has a pipeline of half a gigawatt or a gigawatt, is that why you're defining it as oversupply? Or is it because your investment time horizon is 1 to 2 years, or 3 to 4 years, or is it longer, 5 to 10? Where does that term oversupply come from? And I always draw a lot of parallels between markets that people thought were oversupplied, and now clearly they're undersupplied. So when I started covering Singapore in 2015, 2016, I'm not sure, I think a lot of people in the audience probably remember at that time, there were many big data centers being built in Singapore. There was Singtel's DC West, Kingsland's data center on the west side, there was OneNet North, Keppel. I mean, they were building a lot of sites in Singapore roughly at the same 18 months time span, and everyone was saying, oh man, Singapore is oversupplied. But if you look back today, clearly it was not oversupplied, right? It was just people looking at the pipeline relative to the historicals and making a judgment call that, hey, this is oversupplied. And there's other markets that would apply as well. If you look at Hong Kong, Chung Kwan O, people were saying that market was oversupplied because the industrial estate had lots of guys coming in. You had Chinese guys like China Unicom, you had China Mobile, you had NTT, you had Sunny Vision, you had all these operators building lots of capacity there, and people were saying, oh, Chung Kwan O is oversupplied. And if you look back today, it's all absorbed, right? And hyperscalers have leased a bulk of that capacity. And then in Tokyo as well, people thought Inzai was oversupplied. Even the local Japanese operators that know this market inside out, they didn't want to enter Inzai because they thought it was oversupplied. And obviously, where we are sitting here today in 2024, you would have loved to get a data center in Inzai today. And so I think that really, I think, helps to frame the oversupply dynamic. Is what do you even mean by oversupply? Because when you look back, a lot of the markets were oversupplied, and that I think boils down to the M&A stuff that's been taking place in the industry, right? Like I remember when we advised Mira or Macquarie when they bought AirTrunk back in 2017, people were saying, "Oh my God, you guys are overpaying for AirTrunk. Why are you guys investing so much money? That this multiple is ridiculous." And looking back today, you would not have said Mira was paying too much for AirTrunk, right? So I think it's all about perspective, especially when it comes to oversupply. And I would just end with to answer the question of oversupply, you have to answer some fundamental questions about the industry. Are people using their smartphones more or less? Is cloud adoption growing or not? Is AI going to grow or not? And if you can answer those fundamentally, then you don't really have to worry too much about the saturation point of that will lead to the question of oversupply. It's more so, how do you navigate around the constraints in big markets, big metros that can't accommodate the same level of gigawatt or multi-gigawatt level capacity because of land, because of power infrastructure, and so on and so forth.
That makes a lot of sense. I think we can all see the kind of cloud growth. We can see the smartphone usage. Yeah, it's only going to go up, right? I suppose the AI question is that going to continue at the same speed? And as well, that one seems maybe a little bit kind of more difficult to answer. But as of right now, and as those projections are for it to massively increase kind of compute, we're seeing a rise of these new, I guess you can call them like AI cloud or like GPU as a service providers as well, that are kind of stepping up as like alternatives to the AI solutions from the kind of more traditional hyperscalers. How much of a opportunity is it in APAC for those kinds of businesses, or is it similar to what we were discussing earlier, where a lot of that's being deployed in the US? Because we've seen like CoreWeave, for example, expanding into Scandinavia. I think they've got plans for Spain. So yeah, how is that market shaping up in Asia Pacific?
Yeah, I think one of the new segments that have really altered the fabric of the data center landscape is the rise of the GPU clouds. Some people call them neo clouds. Some people call them AI clouds, but really they're sort of defining the same.
We really need a name for those guys, because
yeah,
it takes way too long to
yeah,
say.
I mean, internally we just call them GPU clouds, just for simplicity. I think, that market exists because NVIDIA wants it to exist, right? Just to put it plainly. I mean, if the hyperscalers had their way, they would just buy all of that GPU stuff from NVIDIA, and there would probably be no neo cloud market or GPU cloud market. I think NVIDIA is realizing that they're not going to have 85 or 95% market share of GPUs in the long term. That's not going to be a sustainable market share number for them. They are fully aware that AWS is building their own GPUs with Trainium and Inferentia. They're seeing Google build TPUs, and Microsoft also working with OpenAI to create their own specialized GPU hardware. Meta as well, with the Open Compute project. And so NVIDIA recognizes that the hyperscalers don't want to be fully reliant on NVIDIA for GPUs. And so NVIDIA is sort of playing defense early on by saying, hey, we'll still sell a good chunk of our GPUs to the Amazons and the Microsofts and the Metas, but we also want to seed a more diverse ecosystem of GPU clouds that can cater for various requirements. I think it's not only just that, but I think there's going to be very local, domestic requirements specific to that country or that market where you need localized GPU capacity within those markets for sovereign AI use, for domestic enterprise use. And so I think that is sort of the market that we're seeing materialize in the APAC region. For like Malaysia, you have YTL Cloud. In India, you have Yotta. And I think you'll see in Japan, you have like Sakura Internet doing some of that GPU as a service. And in Singapore, Singtel has announced that they're also bringing a GPU as a service product to the market. So you'll see more of that pop up as sort of the new wave of Blackwell start to get rolled out, and people start to deploy those in markets.
Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of the kind of the long-term viability then of those neo clouds or AI clouds, I guess maybe 18 months, a year ago, when there was more of like a supply issue with the NVIDIA like H100s or whatever, it was more of like a unique factor that they were able to like kind of provide those, and they were providing them to the hyperscalers. NVIDIA weren't selling to the hyperscalers because they didn't want them to like kind of help with the development of their own chips, and it made sense they had this kind of like place. But as the kind of whole AI infrastructure industry evolves, like how can these companies survive? Are they just going to get swallowed up or lose out to the kind of larger hyperscalers, or is there a niche that they can fill kind of moving forward?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of caution that we hear about, when we talk to, especially in the US markets where we spent some time in. We talked to a lot of the US data center operators, and a lot of them still have reservations about doing big deals with GPU clouds like CoreWeave or Lambda or Crusoe. and it's because of that, because those guys effectively were basically crypto miners 5-7 years ago. They just mined Bitcoin and they were deploying these rigs, GPU rigs in obscure markets to get the lowest power cost so that they can mine crypto and run blockchain applications. And now they're pivoting to GPU clouds. And so there's that stigma initially with, do we do business with these guys? Because we didn't want to do business with crypto guys back in the day. Do we now think it's okay because it's GPUs? So I think there's still that level of caution that people are trying to work around, whether it be financing or getting the deals done or justifying it to their stakeholders and board of directors. Yeah, and so I think it's tough to say what the future will hold for these GPU clouds. I think one of the growth drivers for them today and moving forward will likely be a lot of Chinese hyperscale demand for GPU capacity, because the US government has made it really hard for them to procure GPUs directly, at least the high-end GPUs, like the H100s, like you pointed out, from NVIDIA. And so while they cannot buy it directly from NVIDIA, they can lease it, right, via third party. So they may do it via Oracle, they may do it via the neoclouds. And so that's a way for them to get access to that capacity and work around the restrictions in place. And so I think that will drive sort of the near-term demand. And it really remains to be seen how the new administration, the Trump administration, will approach tariffs and restrictions for GPUs and digital infrastructure.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to wrap up and a great teaser for our geopolitics panel later as well. So thanks for that. Do we have any questions from the audience at all before we move on to our next presentation? Yep, cool. Sorry, I can't see.
Hi, my name is Sutejo. Would like to get your point of view about the cloud repatriation. How is AI is impacting that, or is the cloud industry will still move on into the multi-cloud, hybrid cloud kind of the trend? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something that we've also looked at quite a bit as an analyst team about cloud repatriation. I think speaking to data center operators, they do see some of that happening. And I think that's due to the right sizing of workloads. So companies that have operated in the cloud, have operated on-premise, have learned what workloads fit best in cloud infrastructure and what workloads fit best in an on-prem private environment. And so I think you'll definitely see some level of repatriation. We like to call it cloud rebalancing rather than repatriation, because like most often than not, they're not pulling everything out of the cloud. They're still leaving test dev, burstable, seasonal workloads that need that sort of elastic capacity on public cloud infrastructure, and moving more steady state, predictable workloads into on-premise or private data center infrastructure. So I think you'll continue to see that moving forward. We haven't seen a massive shift or rebalancing out of the cloud. I think that could also be attributable to how AI is so closely tied with cloud infrastructure that a lot of enterprise companies feel that they are not equipped to address the complexities of what they need to do to deliver AI applications. And so they're partnering with the hyperscalers that have developed these capabilities in-house and at scale, and partnering with them to bring AI workloads and AI applications to market quicker, and also to understand where that's going to move. And so I think, just like with cloud, as AI starts to mature and people understand AI workloads a little bit better, there'll likely be some sort of rebalancing of that as well. What kind of AI workloads fit best into the public cloud platforms, and what fits into private AI deployments, like kind of what Equinix talks a lot about is what they're trying to cater for. It's just private AI workloads from enterprise customers that are, that need to sit near connectivity nodes or connectivity-centric locations.
Perfect, thank you. Any more questions? There we go.
Hey, hi, thanks for the session. One quick question on this sovereign GPU providers. They talk a lot about how local LLMs, local SLMs would also create a big market for GPU as a service. What's your thought on that? I mean, recently Indonesia started their own local language model, Sahabat.ai, and how big a market could this be for demand, essentially?
Yeah, it's a good question. And sorry to say that, I would say I don't know is probably the answer. I think the first wave, I think, to adopt these local LLM training within domestic markets will likely be more compliance-sensitive industries. So when you talk about healthcare, banking, things that are very compliance-sensitive will likely make its way into more local AI infrastructure. And I think that's probably the lowest hanging fruit for a lot of these local GPU clouds to address. And then, eventually I think you'll see federal government on a national level or on a state level start to adopt these. But usually governments move a lot slower than private industries. And so I think there'll be sort of a natural progression to how some of these local GPU clouds or LLMs will start to manifest itself. I think, to be honest, for us as a research firm, this is new to us as well. And so we're still trying to get smart about that part of the sector, but we're spending more and more time on it.
Okay, fab. Well, I think we're out of time because we need to get on to the next presentation. But if you have any more questions, sure, Jabez will be more than happy to answer them at lunch. So yeah, thanks very much for joining, Jabez. That was very interesting.
You're welcome. Thanks.